All right, we're live.
Excellent. Hello world, it is Naji Temple here again, cracking cases of human condition and the meaning of existence, our favorite thing to do. Okay, so we today are going to be going over some inquiry by Malcolm from the forums about a theory that may have some overlap with what Podlayer is doing. So we'll go ahead and get into that. And before we get into that, I'll also mention a little bit at a high level of what we were talking about together off camera before we went live. All right, so introductions, then we'll get started. I am Naji Coach.
I'm Naji Mitchell.
I am Naji Ben.
And this is Naji Glenn.
Excellent. So before we get into the question proper, I'll just mention that off camera we went over it first, and there was a reason for this. Generally, when I come on to address things, I have some idea of what is going on before we address it. Often it gets elaborated on while we're here, but I generally have an idea. That's very important because that gives me a sense of comfort as an IG. And that was what we were kind of discussing and doing before we went on, is we were looking for something to address, but we didn't have an idea yet because we've been busy and doing other things. And so we got together like, ooh, this would be a good thing to do. But then we realized we really didn't have any idea of it at all. And it is good, and that's why the temple is here, that we show as much of that as possible. But there's also part that you have to kind of keep private. That secrecy element of the Naji does need to be there. We'll try to do the next best thing, which is as much as we can show you, and that as much of what we don't show you, tell you what we're doing there. And I think it'll make sense why we're doing it like that. And as an IG, you'll probably know, oh, I do that as well, and I need to do that. Okay, what that is a lot of times you see in your pop fiction like how intense the Nazi can be when they're breaking down a case. But actually, the Naji, in a way, are more difficult to be around for the humans. And that's because when we are doing our momentum at its highest, it has the same Ni Alpha thing of just stating truth. So really, there's no difference between the Naji and the Ni-Z, really, as far as like when they get fully going and they're like in apex Fumasta mode, they're going to speak truth and it is what it is. That's either way. So actually, the just saying how truth is, regardless of how it hits anything in the world, is the same for either Ni Alpha. But for the Naji, where it can be worse, is the observations tend to be psychological. So it's one thing if you're making like, oh, I'm noting how a system may be wrong or right, and I'm just saying what's up, and at somewhere in there I hurt someone's feelings because that's the part of the system they worked on, right? Naji, the entire system I'm talking about is how you don't know what you're doing because you have these character flaws. I'm not saying this to hurt your feelings, although it probably is. I'm telling you because I'm solving a problem, and you are in the problem. As a Naji, you're a problem solver, a Ni Alpha problem solver, and the problem is generally people. Something's wrong with your head, and you got to unravel that, or something's wrong with other people, you have to unravel that, or there's something wrong with them, and you know what it is, but you have to unravel how to tell them effectively so they can actually get better. So that's kind of what we do. A part of that is there are drafts to an Naji sounding off, and the first is always the most raw. There's actually kind of two first drafts. The first draft, I would say, is like the inquiry. And in that, the Ni is trying to solve the case. A lot of times here it isn't going to be rough for people because it is maybe going to be offensive in what it's making its assertions, because it's not making assertions yet, it's inquiring. But I found, most of you probably have, when you are in full detective mode, unless the other people are dialed in like you, they have a hard time being around you, because you want to get to the answers. If they can help you get to the answers, great. Otherwise, get out of my way. I need to know what the answers are, and there's an impatience. When it's on a case, it goes as fast after the quarry as it can until it takes the quarry down. There are no breaks. Even in IG, there's no taking people's feeling consideration if that means slowing me down on my internet search, and I'm going to go less searches per hour than I need to do to crack the case. I'm not going to do it. You know what I mean? Any I Alpha which simply won't make those concessions. So not making concessions about the hunger, that prey drive of trying to figure out what's going on, that can be rough. So for example, in the case of Malcolm, it didn't turn out to be much of a situation here, but it can be. There are little things in there that we talked about, but in other cases, sometimes we're doing the discovery, you're kind of like, what does this person mean here? Why they say that? Is it related over here? And it can almost sound, I don't know, like hostile. I've been told that, but it's actually not. It's just without pause, without inhibition. It's like I'm inquiring about something. Basically, it makes any sense. You don't be like a jerk about this, but the way Nye works when it's doing its own thing is like it has its own personal search engine, and it can just search whatever it wants as fast as it wants. So when it starts going to talk to other people and bring them into this, even before assertion, this is inquiry, it just wants them to help with high energy and be useful, be competent. If not, they should recognize this and move out of your wing space. Okay, so that's one element. And I found that sometimes even just like going over someone's email or in live, you guys experience it maybe, when you're talking to someone and they've actually got your interest, ironically, they think they made you angry. They didn't. You were bored. You were bored for a second, and then they brought up something actually interesting. And you're like, what? When was that? Who said that? When? How long ago was that? How big was the tray? And they're like, they get like the Inquisition effect. So as Nye Alpha, when we actually get excited about something, that's where it goes with Ni naturally, or another Nye that actually understands that when the questioning gets going, it's just like its own dance, and you can't get in the way of it. So that's one element, and that rawness of I need answers. The second element is where the Ji comes in. This again, the raw phase, and you can do this in your mind's eye or out loud. If you can do it out loud with knowing hearing is the best. That's what I've done over the years. You have to know what you feel about it. So, for example, another thing Naiji will run into a lot is, besides the kind of like just prey drive of going after the inquiry, is that when you shift to Ji and you're actually kind of going after an idea to like break it down or build it up or anything at all, people have a hard time separating the intensity that you're doing that to the idea they brought to the table from them themselves. And I found that after I've sounded out the first time, and I'm basically just saying my personal opinions on it, which tend to be strong once I figure out what's going on, I can then, in later drafts of sounding off to a person or talking and communicating, better splice for their benefit. It isn't really, this is key, for truth, it isn't really necessary. Truth just has Nye, what is it, and then Ji, what would a hero do? But I found that both those pure drives are rough for people. Both of them are often done alone or with Dragon Fleet or something. But afterwards, you can then be more like, okay, now that I know what needs to be said, I can start like going, what would be the better sequence? And what things could I say first that would front load it, kind of like a logical sequencing? I kind of zai it. I'm like, if I say this first, that will put them at ease and make them feel safe before I go here. It's almost like an interpersonal jigsaw puzzle or like Tetris. That's kind of bring your zai in. The true genius for an IG is Nye and Ji. What is it? What would a hero do? And they're like, okay, to tell people. Him, her. Okay, if I lead with this, the Zai will start telling you you'll get a penalty if you put that logic thing. It's still true, but if you tell them that first, they'll actually just shut down. You won't get anywhere else. And you kind of like you do the ordering of it. But if you try to do that too early, it's allowing their reactions. Ironically, the Zai, the logical one, is more beholden to people's reactions. That sounds funny, but it actually is, because its job is to modulate to help the Ji to win. But the Ji for the Naiji starting out is like, what's the truth and what would a hero do? And I mentioned before, generally the most truthful, heroic answers, most people aren't ready to hear, or if you do, you have to try to figure out how to get it in. And that's where the Zai splices it up, separates things, reorders them, and the like. But for an IG, trying to get the answers, both in a general, what is the answer, existentially, Nye, and then Ji, for me, what should I do? How should I approach this case? What should I tell this person about whatever? So we did it off camera, and in the future we may even do some on camera if we feel it won't get, because on Mountain Case it was totally cool. But sometimes you don't know. And I know, for example, a lot of times when some of the more gnarly things that we are going to address come up, I often read on the forum or it's emailed to me, and I read it and I rant. I rant how I feel about that, and then I present it to you all. We cover it for the first time on camera. That's pretty much how I usually do it. And you guys may even notice that I was a little more ranty when we were talking about this when it first came up, and that's because I really had never heard this before. But I know myself, and I know that whenever I'm presented a fresh case by another human, generally I'm considered to be very demanding and intense. So I try to, like, bleed a little of that off ahead of time, just to get along better.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, with that said, Malcolm making interesting inquiry, and Mitchell is going to kind of set us up on what he thinks it may be. I think you're going to read it out some, and you may also do some, like, maybe translating there. I know Mitchell has got experience with, like, the logic and the philosophy and different models.
Well, this particular model I'm a little familiar with. Not as much as I like it, but we'll see what we can work with here. Okay, so I believe the orchestrated objective reduction theory of consciousness and Podler are describing the same thing, so I'll try to verbalize an argument and see if they agree. Having watched quite a lot of material about the science of consciousness, one thing that I picked up was that no single idea or discipline was going to be powerful enough for science to crack the case for consciousness. It would require a number of different ideas and perspectives to see what is really going on.
Okay, right there. Yes and no. I object to that in two ways. First is the general idea that a single discipline could not actually be like the linchpin, because you can. It's like Podler actually could be seen as it's a single discipline with subdisciplines and subdisciplines and subdisciplines. So it is possible to actually have one unifying thing.
That makes sense, because there's one unique way the world works. So
right, exactly. Sometimes when people say that kind of stuff, it's almost a form of scientific relativism that really no one could ever figure it out. You could. Now, is the answer like Podler? It's always expanding, so it's never fully complete, and it's so huge, yes, you'll have to cut it into lots of little disciplined stripes that people will spend their lives focusing on. But the idea of a single unifying discipline of understanding where there actually is not incongruity, there's not logical gaps, that actually is entirely achievable. Okay, now the other element is kind of the other direction, is that since we're talking disciplines, he's saying about science, actually, if you're not bringing spirituality into it, then no, you won't get the answer. The idea that science, that's kind of implied here, I think, is that science is going to find the unifying theory of the human existence, of human condition meaning existence. But no, actually, Podler has already done it. It's already done that, and it's going to keep going from there. And it had to be a scientific and spiritual model together, or you would not be able to get the unifying map. So right there, he's kind of implying that you couldn't have a unifying thing, and then when he says even like implying how you would try it, he's not mentioning like that other half, which is quite relevant.
Okay. So makes sense. Yeah, I don't really have much to add there. So what is incomplete about the orchestrated objective reduction is that they don't have a non-computational quantum gravity model. My opinion is that Podler is that missing jigsaw piece. We talked about this a little bit, and you said that.
Oh, go ahead. You're saying?
Yeah, you said that like before when we were talking about this we have something like related to it in the sense that like
use of the non-computational something gravity model.
Sorry.
I didn't remember his exact words. So you fit the jigsaw piece.
Yeah. So is that they don't have a non-computational quantum gravity model.
Right.
So okay, that makes sense.
You got it.
That's actually kind of semantics at this point. The actual conceptual error going on here is the one I referenced previously, is that referencing to what Podler is doing as a jigsaw piece has two fundamental errors. Number one, that implies that they were working on the overall puzzle, and they were missing.
Got like the one little.
No, you're totally off. So actually, what's missing. There's many analogies you can call it. Is like the keystone, Rosetta Stone, locking pin, whatever. It's actually the thing that everything was missing to make it work properly. If you were to equate this to like machinery, to get kind of sciencey or mechanical, is like the device in the Iron Man suit. Everything's powered off that central power unit. That's the genius of Tony Stark. All the weapons and everything actually is not that big of a deal. The big deal is the power source. That's what sets it apart. That's why his suit always beats every other suit. It's that power source. And whenever they get one like it, he makes a better one. And so it's important to notice we're going to call that, it's a thing powering everything else. So you wouldn't call it a jigsaw piece. It would somehow have to be like the center of a wheel that all the spokes are actually, resting on.
Yeah, it's not just another missing. It's not just another jigsaw piece. It is the jigsaw piece.
It is the legend.
I just think of like a jigsaw puzzle where like all of the other units connect to that one piece. Like
that
like
is
it's like
Actually, bigger than that. Yeah. Technically, what it is, it's a combination of the centerpiece everything connects to, but it's bigger than that. It's actually the premise of why all the pieces go together. It is literally the map of all the pieces.
That makes sense.
So no piece can ever be that. It's the map. Now the centerpiece can often give directions like a compass does. That's why it's really cool. But at the end of the day,
so it's the blueprint.
West is even bigger than a compass. It's just direction.
It's basically the blueprint.
It's the blueprint. It's the reason why it works the way it works. Now the other element is even if you're going to look at puzzle pieces that would be radial around that central legend or principle of how it works. Again, besides the fact that putting us a jigsaw is incorrect, from his analogy, we would be the way they fit together, but there's not the spiritual pieces. Again, the jigsaw puzzle would actually have to have at least half the pieces being spiritual. And this is something we're going to address a lot. Any model that comes forward, before we actually get more like intricacies of it, we have to stop early on if they haven't done certain things right. When we stop people on a lot is data. That's obviously a problem. This model suffers from the same thing. But there is even one that comes up before data, really, which is just well, they're linked to the data. Because Podler has the data, and we can see what the human condition is and the meaning existence better than anyone else can, how it works. Okay, you would have to account for all those elements. So if you were a person who came, it's kind of like MMA. Okay, you can come from boxing, and that's great, but you're still going to have to address double leg takedowns. Okay, you can be an NCAA wrestling champion who goes MMA, and that's going to be your main bread and butter and your main way of understanding that game. Yes, but they can punch you. They can punch you in MMA. So even if you don't want to do a lot of that yourself, it's part of the total games. If you're a scientist and you prefer being on that side of the spectrum, and you don't like the spirituals much, that's okay. That's okay. However, your science is not science. That's a fact, based on Podler data, if you're not actually counting the spiritual experience. You actually have to say, even just vaguely, somehow how your model is going to account for those data points. Because otherwise, that's your first error, and why it'll all be wrong. It's always going to be wrong because there's actually quite a few data points that are clearly on the board. They're not being brought into the equation. It's same with spiritual. I'm open to someone who's like, I like to come to it for meditation. I like to do art. I like to just go walk in the woods and let the birds talk to me, and that's how I learn about it. Fine. Totally fine, as long as you accept the idea of repeatable experiments. Not that you like to do it all the time, but you understand that your ideas are to go out there. As you push them out from your comfort zone of spirituality and artistry, if it doesn't reach and connect to repeating experiments on a sciencey side, you have to go, okay, it wasn't as true as I thought. It wasn't as fully true because it wouldn't go out that far. So same thing on the sciencey ones. If you're not explaining that spiritual experience or accounting for it, that's a major problem because in the science, it's all about lenses. It's all about, basically, in scientific method, it's observation. With what? Your lens. And some people's lenses are better. They're better able to take in data and make some sense of it so they can make guesses on what it means. So with Mojo, for example, which has got a clearly artistic and spiritual component to it, trying to crack those science cases without saying at least, yes, at some point, someone's going to have to plug that in. And if it doesn't plug in, that means that this theory was not as truthful or complete as I thought it was. So as a premise, with what Podler has put forward, any model that was a dialogue with this, I want to know two things. Where is your data, right? But in this case, I mean, it still applies to him. Usually it's the other way around with sciencey ones, but he doesn't have data. But also, how are you accounting for the human condition in it? As far as not just because you might think like AI or brain mapping. I mean like spiritual stuff. There's like a spiritual flex to mojo reading, although really you could look at, we're like a camera lens, right? We're a camera lens reading someone's mojo, and I guess at the end of the day it's a bunch of ones and zeros that our camera's picking up. But how come some people can read better than others? If you guys have noted what you say about how you progress, and it's very much true, it's a personal thing. So for example, in the scientific method, they generally have a ways to correct. If you want to make it simple, kind of look at this. If I did the nitrous oxide like this, the result went like this, you kind of go in and just break down how much did I do it, how fast did I do it, what I combine it with, and you break down where the error was. But what if you're just being stupid? And being stupid because your life with your wife is all messed up and you're goofy in the head and you just don't think that great. And you just keep banging at a scientific wall, which is what a crazy person does, because the answer is, my head as a human is foggy. If I could actually get to where I wasn't so messed up in my head, I would see the answers here easier. Does that make sense? So a lot of times, it's like trying to actually put another slide under, another slide under, another slide under. Have you actually thought about cleaning your lens or upgrading its power? It's a major element. And if it's not put on the board, I just gotta be honest, I don't take anything seriously. Any spiritual person that doesn't take the basic, like, prediction counts, you have to accept that. Even if you don't want to assign a method of prediction, prediction counts. And if you want to even like go, with that, then honestly, I just can't talk to you, because that means nothing would prove you right. If I actually said that's going to happen, that happens, that's going to happen, I can just do that, and that won't change your mind. Fuck you. I'm serious. I'm not going to waste my time. There's certain things that I do that I kind of like. Is there a point to having a long, extravagant conversation? Because you guys know the way we talk. We can clearly go deep on anything. That's not the issue. The issue is like, what would be the fruitfulness? And yes, Naiji, if you don't find it fruitful, you won't be as smart because you won't be as into it. So
no, you could be doing other things.
You could. I do certain things kind of like see, like, is this going to be something? So the case of Malcolm, I think it could be something. But right now we're kind of like just starting at the basic elements, which is this model does not have data. It doesn't seem to account for the higher end the SS index like it should. And there is the issue of, because of that, it is conceptualized like the mojo phenomenon, or how it works, as being like a piece within a scientific puzzle. But no, it's the single unifying truth that brings together art, science, spirituality, everything, politics, commerce. You know what I mean? Even there, like the way he's talking about, I don't even know if like more like real-world commerce would be affected by that. But it is all one math at the end of the day. And if you were to take what is the one thing driving everything, micro, whatever's going down there, quantum mechanics, macro, gravity, your basic, physics, that's how everything builds to the compounds that make us all up. And then, what is the most interesting, powerful thing that can be done? That's humans. And so, understanding that is the centerpiece. And that's what we're looking at. Because basically every discipline of science, every discipline of spirituality, every discipline of art overlaps on the human. They all overlap on the human, and if you can crack that, there you go.
Yeah.
And even like within the model they're talking about, as far as quantum gravity, so like what's complete about it is they don't have a non-computational quantum gravity model. I don't actually know why you would assume that there is a non-computational quantum gravity model. Why can't it be computational?
Oh, yeah. First, yeah, there's two problems there. Why? Thank you. There's something. One, why can't you have that? And two, that's, I kind of referenced it, but I'll say it again here. No, there's a whole lot more missing than that. The only thing missing is that piece. No, there's quite a few pieces more than that missing.
Yeah, so that's the central point. But then just on the side of like even with just within the classical science discussion, I'm not really sure I'm willing to make that assumption. That is kind of one of the main points of this model that Roger Penrose and Nijai Stewart Hammerhoff use, is that they use the work of a mathematician, a logician named Kurt Gödel, and he proved a long time ago, he had these things called the incompleteness theorems. Maybe you've heard of it vaguely. Basically, what it was about is that there are statements in mathematics that are true but not provable within the formal system that they're represented in. And so that what Penrose uses this to, or he tries to, at least, Ziny, Roger Penrose, and Nijai Stewart Hammerhoff use it to say that they think that consciousness involves essentially non-computational processes, and they use Gödel as proofs to, among other things, to help justify that. And there are people who find it interesting, and there are people who disagree, but there's not really any kind of scientific test that's really demonstrated this either way at any point.
Gotcha. Why don't I go and read through, and I'll let you guys kind of just say any thoughts you have. They kind of went high level on it. Let's just kind of take from the beginning.
Okay. So one aspect that may be difficult or challenging is that Podler is describing consciousness not as something private or personal, but as a means of sharing information. It seems relevant to compare Podler to the relationship between language and self-consciousness.
Yes, in that Podler understands consciousness at a fundamental level, which includes that, but no, like reading Mojo actually allows you to observe consciousness. And I guess if you want to get, I think, overly semantic, you could say that, you know, a camera lens is a form of, you know, linguistics, aesthetic linguistics. But I think that's getting a little bit overly semantic. At the end of the day, I really do think we kind of mentioned that you have the phenomenon itself, and then you have comprehension or interaction with the phenomenon that allows you to register its existence in some way, and then you try to make sense of it. In your own head, with another person, that's where language comes in.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
It's important. No, it's important because, again, if you look at it that way, then Podler would be just a way of looking at language, but it's not, because that again is kind of going like a jigsaw piece versus the kind of like legend of how you understand it all.
Okay. So Podler is a linguistic model of consciousness on the grounds that it is taking language beyond the conditions for self-consciousness.
No,
it's
I'd say minimum. It's an observational.
Observational model of consciousness.
Observational model. I mean, that whole Mojo reading, why it's such a big deal, is because the observational power of Podler practitioners is the most important thing.
Yeah, it's not like the language came first and then the phenomenon came second. The phenomenon came first, and then we took note of it, or Coach took note of it, and then the labels were then added on to describe that phenomenon.
Can we talk about language though in like a broader sense of like the language of Mojo and like the language of like aren't those things in a way? Could you talk about? I mean, it's not that it's just a linguistic model,
but that's I totally see what you're saying, Mitchell, and that's why I actually stated that. I mean, if you want to get, in my opinion, overly semantic, then yes, you can look at it as the eyes when they do ni or v or whatever. I'm registering in that, and the various things it's doing are basically like a physiological cue language. And I use that terminology. That is true.
Mm-hmm.
However, the language actually comes from the interplay of them and your attempt to make sense of them.
True.
As opposed to the proper language, where the subcomponents of like a sentence or a statement are the words, and the sub thing of that are the letters. All of those are symbolic. Sentence to word to letter are all symbolic, but that's not how it works with Mojo reading. It's actually trying to figure out what that means, but there's actually a mathematical answer. So
right.
One of the differences there, is language is often it tries to bridge certain things, but it often kind of steers away from truly being mathematical. But in this case, actually, it is.
It's like a way to refine the language. Like the language has to match up to something.
Yes.
Empirical referent.
Yes.
Exactly. But then when you're actually looking at it, this is critical. When you break down, say, Japanese, at the end of the day, you're going to come down to the fundamental things of why that language came to be into being. And the first step of it was something that was created, an add-on. But with Mojo, when you're actually looking at it, you're looking at what is causing everything, and because of that, you're also looking at, right in the face, the apex of complexity, possibility in the cosmos. That's what you're looking at. You're observing the most sophisticated phenomenon doing what it does. So really, that's like saying the sun is a language. If the sun, which it was at one time, was considered for a long time the thing in science to focus on. You focus on suns, you figure everything else out. So I mean, in a way, I mean, but that wasn't trying to figure out language. It's trying to figure out, it's so powerful and important. If we figure out why it does what it does, we're figuring out why the cosmos does, why natural law works. How you're basically seeing that's how it's saying it is done. But language doesn't do that. It describes, and if you break it down, it's a system for describing. That's what you'll get. If you break language down, it goes down to a system of describing things or explaining things, communicating things, as opposed to observing. With language, there's still a part where the human is actually just taking it in, attributing meaning, and then giving it some kind of linguistic form. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like viewing the sun as a language. Yeah, I see your point. All right, then. Let's continue. So this is a point about logical consistency that he's making. He labels it logical consistency. So the statement is, and this is a little foggy. We were talking about this earlier. We're not really sure what he means here. And I asked him about it. So he says, a mojo rejects any symbolic function.
That's not actually true.
Yeah.
There are symbolic functions that are a part of mojo manifesting. For example, ritual, language, things like those are symbolic, but they
exactly
say G or Z. So really, it's a smooth continuum of those powers expressing themselves. But then also, I was mentioning real quickly, something said off air, is that it seems like he wants a very sciencey or mathematical answer. And let me tell you, as a Naiji, who's very good at this kind of game, never ever want a certain kind of answer. Just want the answer.
Yeah.
If you want it to be logically sounding, if you want it to be pretty, I mean, in those things, it can be sciencey or spiritual. Make that error. They want it, the truth to be. It is what it is, and you have to want to know that. I want to know what it is, and so already this kind of very logical way, where it's almost like a bit, I don't know, sanitized or something, where there's like, I think, fuzzier elements that I don't think this model and this way of coming things can comprehend, doesn't want to equate. Logic, for example, as a philosophy, tends to have the error, as does science in general. If it can't quite find a equipment that can measure that right now, the fact that there's influence people are feeling from it, they're like, oh, I can't measure that, so until I can measure it, then it doesn't really count. It counts. It should just count as something that is out there that currently can be measured. And just leave it at that. But it should at least be in your head as like a quantity, even a nebulous one. So then, in this case, I think this continues on because he basically makes a logical couplet, which is if this statement is true, then you go with the falseness or negativeness of that, and then you get some assertion. Okay, before we kind of get into all the complications of that, which I think this way of coming at the problem would be comfortable with. Comfortable with kind of like going these like logical couplets from here. But actually the issue is in the first two couplets, which is, as Mitchell alluded to, the first statement is a bit vague, and then it's always dangerous. You should watch out for this in your own mind and in other people. It's usually where rationalizations reside, is when they state something vaguely and then jump on that to make a firm closure. Whenever you see a human doing that, including yourself, check yourself. Seriously, I just highly recommend you do that. You find mojo reading, you kind of have a vague reason to give it an answer, and you're like, yeah, that's it. Okay, you guys know from experience, when you get that comfortable feeling thing, but it doesn't feel clean. It just feels like, and you jump on it, watch that. If it's vague and you're getting too eager on it, that's generally a dangerous thing.
That's definitely a bad sign.
It's a bad sign. And anytime you're trying to actually figure anything out, be very aware of that process. Mm-hmm. From spiritual seekers to scientific, there's just two things. Wanting the answer to have a certain form. I want to be logically pretty. I want it to be spiritually pretty. I think it has all those elements in its way, but really it just is what it is. And there's that, and the other one we just mentioned is, making sure, for example, I think Malcolm would know the first sentence, the statement of it was rather vague. I think he kind of said he's just feeling it out. That's cool, but he should just note in himself. This is where the Nai with the Ji can make you very wise. ask yourself, why did I make a statement that is a little vague? And then the next statement is exceptionally like trying to close. Like, if that's the case, then win, game over. A vagary with a game ender after it, that almost always means rationalization. Or that you drove past the town you're supposed to stop at to figure out the answer.
Yeah. Every bit of it has to be clear and concise, and just like you can see why that is.
This sentence, even if we do take it like at face value, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure it is true. I mean, emoji rejects any symbolic function. It seems false.
We may disagree with the statement actual thing, but the first thing is like it's a bit vague, but it's stated as if you could build on it. I have to object just to building on a vague statement.
Yeah, and it's not true if it's false. I don't really see where that comes from.
Is a cloud a good foundation to build a house on? I don't know.
And that's actually a good analogy because clouds are like vague. They're like
it looks like it's like a substance I can like use for something, but really I match my hand through it, just like evaporates.
So what I found is that models that kind of get overly like logician. And this gets into like numbers that cannot be equations you can't like have a real world formal testing for yet. But that's just the way it is, and that's the only way you're ever going to know, really. And so I've noticed that when you don't have that, people tend to want to find like game ender statements. But I use all of them. I actually use like, that just feels like natural law saying that. That feels right to me. Do you know what I mean? Like, that has logical consistency. I see proof of that in the world. I mean, there's lots of ways of doing it. But at the end of the day, you'll actually have to have something in the world occurring to prove it in like the initial instance, and then other people try it and see if they get the same results. And you could do that through scientific method, or you could do that through prayer. But at the end of the day, you actually have to like say like, what I think is how it's working is like this, and always is that requirement. Then you should be able to predict something happening. You know what I mean? For example, like those computational numbers that can't be done in a real world thing, but that's, if they had truth to them, they should overlap something. They should overlap something that is occurring. So that generally just means that the observation ability is not quite up to proving that logic. But to me, to have logical truth without being able to have an instance of natural law doing that, you can't do that. And here's why. It sounded really good, like E equals MC squared, and it had great logical consistency, that anything that wasn't that sounded stupid, right? Then quantum mechanics. It makes no sense. It makes no, and that E equals MC squared was so clean, and it did apply to a lot of things, but unfortunately, that's just an idea. And now you're confronted with quantum mechanics.
And the two don't mesh.
And the two don't mesh. So that's why you always need to be able to observe, because that's the only way you know if your ideas really do account for everything. Because equals MC squared, people thought it did, but it didn't.
Does it not mesh, or is it that they haven't been able to figure out how they mesh?
Well, that's true. I mean, they're both true up to a point.
The question is they don't mesh as they should, but there's two things. There's the issue of does it mesh in nature? Yeah, it totally meshes in nature. There's no problem for nature. But in science, right now, you basically have a pretty decent understanding of quantum mechanics and a pretty decent understanding of like gravity, like the big stuff. But then the reason why all the equations seem to work for both of them disagree with each other. And that's what's got scientists stumped.
Yes, right. And there are lots of other mysteries like dark matter and whatnot, where we're not really understanding exactly why gravity works like it does, and people might actually think that might have to do with that. The relativity might actually have issues, but
sure. So totally. So this is a very simplistic thing I'm throwing out there, but I'm just making the case that there was a period of time where quantum mechanics was way further behind and less known. There was a lot less. People were mainly trying to figure things out as far as like how the fabric of existence works with telescopes, and trying to predict like the heavenly bodies doing stuff. Like microscopes was mainly for biology, and then for chemistry, and then for physics. Over time, it got to where it could actually like the resolution could start breaking into the fabric of existence. Problem, it broke into the fabric of quantum mechanics, and like as a programmer language, it looks like there's a fairly unified programming language for quantum mechanics and one for gravity. but it looks like Mac and PC. And everyone's trying to figure out like
Exactly. That's a great analogy.
how does that
Mac
work?
and PC. Yeah.
But I mean, but it does work, and it's more complicated than either one of those programs.
Exactly. That was my point.
They would mesh, but they don't yet. And only observation proved what seemed like logically seamless. You know what I mean? It seemed like there was not much of a problem. In fact, just know a lot of physicists were very pissed off when quantum mechanics of observational discoveries came in because it made things ugly again. Like they made it so.
Yeah. There are physicists who don't accept things. Like that's happened in the history of science. I've read books where like they won't accept models or like they're weird and at first. And it takes actually this is the quote Max Planck. That's just really important. Often it takes an older generation of scientists to die out for an idea to be accepted.
It's true. Very true.
It's unfortunate, but it's true, yeah.
Because their careers are built on it, and they have so much influence. Because they are actually really intelligent people who did good things, and so people listen to them. But they got too possessed.
Yeah, happens a lot, and that's why like Mojo reading, it's so important that we do that as like a foundation. Because not just like that's the only thing Pod Larry does. We do so much else, spirituality and things like that. But it's a great like Jedi training technique to make sure that you're not getting too full of yourself. Like,
yeah.
It really keeps making sure, is my lens clear? If it's not, you're like, oh, I missed that. And that tells you, I'm not as clear-headed as I thought I was.
And that's very, very dangerous in this regard because, like, we have really strong opinions and we can get, like, this sway over people and you could just take something in totally the wrong direction and now someone actually comes out with the correct answer. They're going to have to do so much work to fix it.
Exactly, for sure. And, but on that, also, talk about, but just going to get back to Malcolm's case, to bring it back on the thing is the issue there is that I'm noticing there's kind of like a desire to want it to be a scientific or logical way. That's the unifying understanding will be a theory. It won't be a way, it'll be a theory, but it's both. And because of that, I'm noticing like here, like this idea, this trying to close, like I got it with a logical couplet. Like, kind of like there's like a bite, like I can feel him as a person trying to bite on that for sureness, but actually that's something he should feel a little unsure of and ask why he's looking for that. Particularly in the case, say with Mojo, is I would only accept that there is no observational and prediction way to find out something is true until it was discovered. But I'd still want it. I would just be like, no one really has that yet, but I would want to have that to go with. And then the case of like with Pod Layer, once it's brought on the board, to me, people do this all the time, for example, in all kinds of things, they want to explain why something is, when always the best way is to just like show evidence. Do you mean arguments, kind of like in the court? I mean, you kind of look at it this way, even Z with it, Z to the Xi, is you generally go in order of, importance of sway. And so like physical evidence or repeating phenomenon is the most, important evidence you have. And legal systems is based not on science and not on spirituality, but really just sort of a combination of the two of like, how does it work for humans as far as like a just and strong way to try to figure out how to deal with disagreements. Very strong disagreements, right? You murdered a person, no I didn't. Very strong disagreement. So at the end of the day, you have to have a reason to base things on. I think any theory is good, but it should come to that at some point. I always think that when you say that, and just know, it's into scientific models and spiritual models, both go those in here a lot. It cannot be computated. It cannot be done. It's almost like I don't have to worry about it. No, it's kind of the Hubble telescope. There's a lot of cosmos out there. And I got a new lens, I found new stuff, but guess what I found out? There's a lot of cosmos out there. That's how, if you're really seeking truth, that's what you're going to keep seeing. A lot more, and then that tells you, whoa, there's a lot more. And your brain can never get lazy on that. If everyone's like, A plus B equals C, and now I can just, that's it, E equals MC squared, I'm done. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that.
No.
You're not done.
So I just know that you guys, it's like, you're not
about like in the
I'm sorry, Mitchell, go ahead.
It was like the abductive reasoning thing you were talking about, and the genius, like you're like a mega genius, and because of that, you don't want to speculate too much. Like, what would be an ultra genius?
Right.
Like, you don't want to even
I don't
be
have
too
that
eager to give an opinion on that because you just don't. If you knew that, you'd be one.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, part of my mega genius is actually being wise enough to know I don't have the data to do that maneuver.
Yeah.
I kind of hear. It's very important. I'm glad you brought it up. Kind of what he's doing here. I'm like, you might need to realize that this equation that either the way you're coming at it or the data you have right now is not up to solving this. And maybe there should be less eagerness to close and more eagerness to canvas.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. You kind of have to be able to keep your ego in check and actually base it off of what you actually know and what you have the current capacity to understand. And really, I mean, if you're going to say you know something, it should be based on what you currently understand. So.
But I think, like I said, I think Malcolm's come from a good place, and it's an interesting kind of thing. But whenever friend,
I don't want to. I think we don't want to be like too hard on. Malcolm, but you know, it's a good discussion, and it's important to sort of like evaluate the argument based on like what it's what it's saying and how that really applies.
Exactly.
To make a good assessment of how this argument actually works with Todd Lair with you.
Exactly. Exactly. We're in friendly terms with Malcolm, and I think well of the contributions he's been making. It's just that, like we do here in Naiji Temple, it's cases of the human condition, the meaning of existence. So Naiji, as friends, we tend to bring cases to each other. And so even though you're doing it a friendly way, actually that is if two Vizi are hanging out and they're gonna like talk legal cases, when they talk, they literally want to know what the other person thinks. And so if you gave them a file to like look at, and they looked at it, and instead of like going with the whole file, they're like, are this from photographs in the lower part of the installation? They're like, oh no, I didn't give you photos for that. I don't think there were any in there. Really? Because this installations like this, they usually have those kind of cameras on all floors. How come they didn't give it to you? You should probably ask that. Because otherwise, there's no point like me getting into it once I realize, like, I think actually you may have missed a critical principle early on. And so I'd actually just be contributing to the maybe sophistry or confusion that has you if I spend like, 90 minutes over martinis talking about the details currently in the file. You know what I mean? It kind of makes it a longer, more elaborate thing. And really, I kind of know it right away. I think we may need to look at this from a different direction. So that's all I'm kind of saying with Malcolm is like, because I think well of him. It's just that I think initially, the first thing I'm getting is that the approach, classic, Naya Raji, the approach is so important.
Okay. Yeah. So
I found most people when it comes to like elite achievement in anything, both in understanding something or physical or relationship, it's that ability to kind of like figure out if maybe I should just come at something different, which often involves maybe I should be different. If I just was different and came at different, I think would change the results. You see a lot, I'm sure. I'm sure you see a lot. For example, Mitchell with tennis, all kinds of sports, particularly solo sports, particularly solo sports, where their head is not kind of coming at it right. Like they're visualizing this in an adversarial way when they shouldn't, or they're not thinking of like, I need to summon aggression, I need to be totally calm. That's not.
They need to try their game in a whole different way, and IG are very good at that. Actually, I have a great example. Roger Federer is in IG. The U.S. Open is going on right now, big tournament, a lot of great matches, and there's always tournaments leading up to it, and Roger Federer is probably the best player of all time, at least has the best records. So that you could debate that, but anyway. He's number 2 right now, and the best is Xavi Novak Djokovic, also phenomenal player. And he's been beating Federer most of the time. Federer's a lot older, but he's really, really talented, and when he's playing really well, he can just beat anyone. But he has trouble with Djokovic. Djokovic is really consistent and stuff, but one thing that Djokovic was weak on earlier in his career, and he's got a lot stronger, is his serve. He would miss it. And what Federer started doing in a tournament leading up to the U.S. Open is because Djokovic kind of has a groove with his serve now, Federer would step up on his second serve and attack it really aggressively, and that started messing with Djokovic's head, and because of that, he's serving more.
Nice.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm sure Federer trained that some, but
he did.
But the bigger part of it, that's like the bigger part was realizing, thinking of it. Because probably, I mean, when he rushes the net, I'm sure he did some extra training because he wouldn't use it on the opponent. But he's working on skills he's been training for years. So
exactly.
Most of those tools were kind of already there, but he wasn't thinking to use them in that way on the problem.
Yeah.
So I mean, he trained,
exactly, and he messed with his head.
Yeah, and he shifted the whole dynamic of everything.
The dynamic of the match. That's exactly my point. Yeah.
Totally, for sure.
And it messed with Djokovic because he wasn't ready for it. He's a good server, but he was not used to Federer doing that. He didn't really have a ready response to it, and he started serving like crap. He was double faulting again, and then Federer beat him.
The two elements. One, like it totally changed the entire dynamic, and the other element that I was kind of mentioning is that Federer is not actually working with like new tools.
No. Right.
I'm sure he works some on that, but a lot of times you just, like in this case, using the toolkit of like logical couplets, that might not be the toolkit. But like Malcolm has lots of toolkits. That's a big part, kind of like realizing like, oh, I have lots of toolkits I could use to crack a case, and choosing the right toolkit for a case.
Exactly.
Critical.
Mm-hmm. Because like Federer could keep working on his returns from deep in the court and his slice return. He can keep working on that and perfect it, but that's what he needed to do.
Yeah, he kind of like
tactic.
He found like something that the other dude, the Zyv, did not canvas. He did not know how to deal with that because he kind of like brought into the arena like something new that he was not ready for.
Took him by surprise. Yeah.
Took him by surprise. That's what Nagy do. We just
There's two.
I thought it was cool because like
it's a great example. Thank you, Mitchell. There's the element of it took him by surprise, but also something. One of the reasons why it took him by surprise is, as Mitchell was alluding to, he has the way that Federer has been winning normally.
Yeah.
And he's very good at it. And so it's very tempting that when you lose to this opponent to just try to grind more on that way you're already really good at, and not accept that tool may just not be able.
Maybe not what you need. They might have the way to deal with that. You got to try something new.
And so maybe rushing the net like that is a little more physically or psychologically uncomfortable for him. But if he really knied it, and apparently he did, I am able to do that tactic, and that tactic will actually win. And so a lot of times it's like solving like an equation here. You're like, should I come in, like you see like the way I do it. I come into problems from like spiritual, artistic, sciencey, street. And I like to keep coming from different ones. One, because if it's right, all the different approaches should still be okay. And generally, different approaches work. Like certain things I try to figure out, it helps to think of it in street terms. If you try to think of like the cosmos in street terms, it doesn't work so great. You know what I mean? It helps think of them in more like, a sciencey way.
Carl Sagan.
What's that?
Carl Sagan style, Like.
Exactly. And there, obviously there's some variation on that, but generally you want to let the thing you're working on choose the lens of understanding you use to crack it. Because, natural law tells you what lens works to look at, quantum mechanics. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you want to see, it'll tell you instead of like trying to make it be what fits to your lens. It sounds simple, but you always have to make your lens sufficient to observe it. Its job is not to dance in front of your lens in appropriate logical or spiritual fashion that your lens can pick up on it. That's not how observation phenomenon works. It's phenomenon, and then you either are or are not able to observe it with your lens. Yeah. That was a great analogy, though. Very true. And
Nagy are really good at that too. Like,
and often, like I said, an element of that is there probably was some discomfort on Federer's part. Otherwise, he would have done it early in his career.
Absolutely. And he's had issues with rivals like that. He had before this. He had Nadal. Nadal's not playing as well right now, Javi Nadal. But that was another rival of Federer's, and Federer was doing so well before that. But then Nadal came in, and Federer didn't have a way to beat it. And the mistake Federer made, I think, and he might have learned from this with his rivalry from Nadal earlier, was that he didn't change enough. He just kept trying to improve on the same thing. But Nadal had kind of cracked that,
right?
And he had a game that was Nadal's a lefty, Federer's a righty, and Federer's weakness is one-handed backhand. So it's great one-handed backhand, but it's not like a real strong shot. It's more of a finesse. And Nadal has this big kicker forehand And so when that kicks up high to his one-handed backhand, it's not it's not a wieldly shot. It's just good against.
You're like adjusting your lens to read their weakness and then countering their weakness, kind of.
Yeah. In this case, with the if you look at weakness, because we are hunters, I do look at that some ways. Is I'm trying to crack a case, and I'm like, which lens would allow me to bring the quarry down? I guess you could look at it as like as far as a weakness, I'm looking for like conceptually what's its softest entry for me to get my brain around it. You know what I mean? What would be the way to do that? That's
you can call it a weakness, but yeah, we kind of like what's the like let me like scale this mountain and see where the entry is, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or like the Death Star or whatever.
Yeah, that's more universal. Like in tennis, you might call it a weakness, but like you might not call a weakness in some other.
But I still think it's a great example. And instead of maybe a weakness, a way you can look at it, which does include weakness, it is, and this is why we're the yinest of the yang, but it's very effective. We're basically looking for the softest place to strike.
Yeah.
To crack a case, to crack opponent, to get through the mountain. And even like just trying to get like for example like art, you're trying to like look at a canvas, like where do I start? It is you're like I have to find a way in. I got to find a way in on Nadal's game. I got to find a way in on this mountain.
Yeah, and Nadal did it to Federer. So Nadal, when he came in, he was the younger player. He was doing that to Federer. He figured out that kind of weakness in his game. And not any matchup between them, they're both really good players. But when it gets into the nitty gritty, he just has that advantage over Federer, and Federer couldn't deal with it, and he didn't change enough. And so then Djokovic just started doing that to Federer, and now Federer is like, well, you know what? This time around, I'm going to change some stuff.
Nice.
To see what happens. And so far, it's been effective. We'll see if it continues. But Federer's actually getting older now.
It's interesting.
It's cool that they both keep getting better that way because they're both like trying to like to
do the other.
Yeah, Djokovic's gonna have to do it now. So Djokovic, Federer's kind of got him now. So now he's got to do something different.
And then they can then yeah, that's interesting. And then they'll be able, because for Nige it's kind of like you're shape shifting. Like you have like all these different like modes and forms you're in. It's like cat form, I'll play like this. Like I don't know, bear form. I'll play more defense. I don't know.
Werewolf form.
The druid.
Yeah. Turtle form.
But yeah, I think
the key element is that you have to let, if you look at Nadal like as a mountain or like any kind of natural phenomenon, you actually have to observe it and then let that decide the shape shifting to go into. Sometimes you shape shift your form so long and you're really good at it that it's uncomfortable to change another shape, but that may be the one to be in.
Yeah.
It's interesting, Coach. We were talking about like the weaknesses or like the soft part, that like the soft area to strike, and we're also really good at the other end of it, which is like finding the most strongest to lead with.
Oh yes, you really look the same way. Which that's good. It's a very good point. You're basically the shape shifting you're trying to do is this is like the terrain, and you're trying to feel around it. And as you feel around it, you're trying to strengthen that probing. So simultaneously you're strengthening it, but you're also trying to figure out where is the entry point. And the combination of the two tells you to shapeshift into. What goes in front as the driving strength, and why. Why is that? Because it's carbonite. And you have other elements, but carbonite is a way to do it, and the soft spot on this, vulnerable to carbonite. And that's why you find out what you're supposed to be. So it's a combination of what is soft, and then of that soft, you're going to maximize of what pierces it the easiest. Find the softest and hit it with the sharpest, hardest. Recipe for a kill strike.
Right.
Absolutely.
Interesting. It's very interesting stuff. I like this. The tennis analogy was really helpful.
What you'll find, kind of going off that, is that if you have like a graphite way of working your way in, and you're used to that, you may just probe around something and you've missed soft spots, like soft spots in Nadal's game. But you don't want to probe or push with that, and that's actually allowing Xi. Like, I like this form. I like playing like this. It feels good to be this, as opposed to allowing the functionality requirements of natural law to shape your form.
Yeah, you always have to keep like challenging yourself and like challenging your lens, like challenging, is the way I'm looking at this the right way? Maybe I could go about this differently than a way I'm comfortable with. Like being at the edge of like your comfort zone in terms of what you're willing to change into is very important. Like always kind of asking those questions and asking them, especially like when there's a situation you're having trouble with. There's a situation where you really want to get the right answer. Is very important.
Yeah. I think Nige are very good at doing that. But it's like interesting. It's interesting wondering how it would work differently for like a Vez Tower, like Nadal or Djokovic, or Xaivi and a Xaivi, because they have they have similar powers in a way. I mean, especially Djokovic. They're just like in reverse order. So they would come at things. Because I guess the being is more first because they have Xai power. I don't know if that would.
They're more in the moment. It's hard. I don't. It gets a little bit murky when I try. Yeah.
Obviously, I think it requires a lot more study. I look forward to getting more into tennis. The one thing I'll just throw out there is that in general, for all towers, the way they get stronger is that they have to place themselves in a greater variety and intensity of circumstance and get knocked down and then come back up stronger, more balanced. Knocked down, stronger, balanced. And then when they face an opponent, then that opponent is not able to do that within the match. So they kind of have to build up their ability to handle that. That's why it'll be tricky, for example, something for Xaivi or Xaivi, because if a new thing has developed, like Federer's doing this new thing, it can be very challenging because they're not used to it. And we mentioned this in MMA, for example, applies in tennis and everything else in IG do. You might not, this is critical, you might not be able to find a tennis partner who can replicate that attack. And for a tower,
Federer's known for that. He's known for being so unique and having all these like.
It's challenging for a tower to kind of get like antibodies to an attack it does not have familiarity or experience with.
But one thing towers are very good at is they're both Djokovic and Nadal and all the and just a lot of the Xaivi in tennis are they're very strong defensively. Obviously, they are very consistent. They are very good counter punchers.
Countering and also, like I said, being able like if they make that kind of save normally, they always make it.
Yeah.
So like we're
so consistent, and that's where Djokovic beats Federer.
Yeah. That's we have the creativity and all kind of the passion, but we have to really make sure we dial in that now if we do this, we're generally invincible.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you can figure out how to actually be on beat for longer than the event is, and you can actually go in, like, take lead on the V and just keep burning V in charge, like running the table longer than the time of the event. That's always how Nige do it. You have to, first of all, be slow to start, and then we can actually be, flaky. So if you get to where you do rituals, all the best Nige do this, where you gear up before you go out. So the first, Federer serve is hot and genius. You know what I mean? There's no, like, getting to that in a few sets in. First set, prepare yourself. Like, in his locker room, drilling on his own court, before he gets there, you know what I mean? He's already got that ready. So he doesn't have to build, because Nige doesn't have to build the magic up. Build the magic, build the passion to get the zone. But the best Nige, they've learned how to build their kind of like, I'm in my zone. They listen to certain music, do certain drills, and they're like, I'm in game mode. And they're already there before they get in the court. That helps the consistency because you won't have to build up to that. The next one is getting to where you can hold that totally lasered in. When Nige do this, we're so scary. You just come in genius and passionate, and then you stay on beat, and you have more than enough V to last the entire engagement. They never see anything but genius dragon striking, another genius dragon, and strike, and it goes like that until the time's up.
Yeah. Yeah, Federer's very, very good. I mean, there are other Nige in tennis. Federer's.
Oh, for sure.
He is for an IG, he's extremely consistent. That's why he's done so many amazing things.
No, and that's what I'm saying is you'll notice in IG as they lower on is the being slow starters and inconsistency are their.
You're absolutely right, and there's another one, Marty Fish, who's like he's an older guy. He's an IG, and he came out and he was actually doing, this was like a few years ago. He was pretty mediocre for most of his career for a professional tennis player. Obviously, he's a great tennis player, but wasn't really ever that impressive. And then all of a sudden he had this resurgence. He was just playing amazing, and like no one understood it. And then he kind of fell away from that, and now he's just sort of mediocre again. But
yeah,
I noticed that happens a lot to Durams.
Yeah, that consistency happens two ways. You're right. It happens like within a match. consistency.
And then over their career, yeah, both of them.
They're kind of they're streaky, but in their streaks, you're like, whoa.
Agassi was like that too. He's a G9.
Sure.
Yeah, as long as you don't get obsessed with the idea of like I'm on a streak, because then that can kind of like mess you up. Then you might be possessed by the fact that I have this kind of streak that I go on. Because I know that we were talking about this a little bit, Mitchell. Because it's kind of like you want to make sure that you always stay in that kind of like zone that's the most pure, I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like you can always be wrong, you know. I mean, like even if you like, okay, I won that match, but maybe there's like something I need to be quicker on switching, you know, to this and catching these shots and, you know.
Yeah, but I think Naiji have also actually several emojis have in certain ways, but Naiji like have almost all the varieties in themselves in this way. The one I see the most common like this is both the Jez Hunters, which is no matter how confident people think they are, when Jez Hunters are really confident about their game, they just look at you, and it's very hard to not make you want to check yourself. Do you know what I mean? It's really fascinating. I really enjoy sometimes, like in the MMA, we actually see like the Baiji and Naiji matched up because they both do it so well, but differently. They just kind of these mental rituals that say, I'm a kind of person that does this. You're the kind of person that does this. And they do it all the time. They do one more literal, one more conceptual. But they basically like add you up as a person, you and them. And if they're strong, as they usually are, they're like, I just don't think you can handle me. Even if you're a little more consistent than me, even if you're this, I just, the elements I'm bringing to the table, I don't think, a strong suit for Jez Hunters, is why they make good life coaches, is like really being able to assess someone's character sheet, including your own. So if they've done it well, first of all, Jez Hunters tend to make good game plans as far as breaking down someone's game psychologically and physically, so they generally have a very good attack plan for that person. But then they radiate this energy of like, I got your number. And a lot of times, besides the fact that they did really focus on how to particularly take you on, the fact that you can feel it, you can feel that like their sureness. I always love when you actually see them like face off. It's like there's physical stuff, but really it's like a sureness battle. Who's more sure? Because one thing you'll see a lot, I'm sure it happens in tennis as well, but definitely in MMA, is that fighters that kind of get psychologically like eaten by one of the Jez Hunters, they don't fight as well. Like, it's almost like the eyes of the Jez Hunter like looking at you like you're less than me. And when you walk up to the line to do your serve, they look at you like, yep, that's how a loser walks up. That's how person. and if they actually think this, that's what a person looks like who's going to lose to me. I guess they're like, yep, this is a motif of you losing to me. And it's hard to shake that off. A lot of times they do. It actually does work. A lot of times people just don't look them in the eyes. Because
don't look them in the eyes.
It doesn't help anything. You just look at the chest, the ball, and shit.
Yeah, because I think what they're doing is they're noting a motif that they've relived several times over with so many other previous opponents. Like I know that whenever I'm about to win, that usually there's some things that happen in the environment that cue me in and let me know that okay, I'm gonna succeed now. And usually it has to do with like the very first initial moments of when that other person walks onto the scene and the kind of energy that they emit, the kind of confidence that they have. You can tell, okay, I know how to deal with them.
Basically, it's just like in art and in journalism. You see, both the Jez Hunters are really big on like telling a specific story. Like Niche Aberton also do a lot of writing and very good, but they don't tend to, kind of Game of Thrones, they don't tend to like tell you the message. Jez Hunters tell you this is a story of what's happening, like that's it. Like a narrative. They're narrating that's what's going on. And they do it like I've seen like I've seen this in tennis with Naiji players actually. Who was it? Oh, I forget, it was one of the older players. But he did it. I noticed that Michael Jordan does it, and MMA fighters do it. When they get the score, first of all, as they're going to get the score, they just exude, this is happening. This is happening. So you can get along with it or not. And then when they score it, they kind of look at everyone with this like gaze that says the story is going as I said the story is going to go. And then if you score on them when they miss the basket or something, they just get this annoyed look of like, why are you resisting the story? Do you mean like why? And it's quite dominable. People find it very hard psychologically to deal with. They're so like, this is how the story is going.
Yeah, it's like resistance is futile. You know, like,
non like calm way. It's actually the opposite. Resistance is futile, and this actually works. Really, all G-Mojos, but especially just hunters. You're making me angry. Your non-compliance with the story is pissing me off. Get with the program. You know what I mean? Like, not like a logical way, but like.
Yeah.
It's almost like someone went on stage and started like acting the lines out for a character not supposed to be doing. The director's like, where the fuck is that? No. You go over there and you say this. That's your role here.
You're supposed to lose.
You're supposed to lose.
I played an IG and I know they get.
They like signed up for a role of like Darth Vader, and then they start playing the role of like a fairy or something. It's like on stage.
Or it could be like, yeah, you scored a point, but you're still gonna lose. You're still gonna lose.
Oh, 7:26. We're almost done here, but I think we kind of jumped around quite a bit. It's kind of fun. We're jamming. We didn't really have a major plan today. Did we address this thing somewhat? I think we kind of covered like the initial stuff.
Yeah, there's about one more thing.
I think he'll just kind of maybe give us a little more clarity to know what we're talking about. I
agree. Yeah, that's probably the most central point. Yeah. So here's another thing really quick. So he says the value of the word Xeni does not relate to how a Xeni is something different from other things, but refers to an untangible, undefinable quality that all Xeni have in common.
That actually does.
Okay.
I mean, again, I acknowledge that the word Xeni is not actually the Xeni.
No. Yeah. No question.
Just a representative.
At no point that's their major point. Like, it's not, it never can be. However, the phenomenon does exist. It can be observed to have differences from other phenomenon in existence, and then you can make a term to try and label that. That's the function of language. Language will always fall short of observation, and observation will always fall short of phenomenon. That's just the way it works. But that's like saying like it's a pass-fail. No, it's more like how accurate is it? For example, right now, Xeni means how many Xeni we have in the collection. So automatically, when we get more of them, literally, the accuracy of the term Xeni increases. Because right now, our term Xeni equals, like, I don't know, like 800 Xeni, 700 Xeni ladies. You know what I mean? So it's equal to that quantity, and it'll just keep increasing from there. It'll never be the whole phenomenon. That is true. But I think it's kind of like a more sciencey faux end to almost go like, oh, so then what does anything mean, or it doesn't actually connect, or it doesn't represent. It does. It represents symbolically and incompletely. But it does represent more accurately than anything else does. So it does actually have connection, and a superior connection than others, but it's not as good as it could be ever, and it'll never be complete.
Yeah, this is where proper Xi comes into the mix, where nothing is ever 100% or 0%. It's always, it's always getting a little bit more closer to the standard of what it is considered to be like absolutely true. And that's changing always, and then as far as where you like, what kind of score you get, that's always changing. So 99%, 98%, that's always going to be shifting around as well. Truth is like a target that you're always trying to, get closer and closer to. You never actually hit it perfectly. That's always a work in progress kind of thing.
Mitchell, what you giggling at?
Nothing. I'm just thinking.
Oh,
sorry. My parents ask me that all the time. I'm just laughing to myself, and they're like,
that happens to me all the time.
Well,
that's exactly what's happening.
I wanted to say I'm sorry, but I can't tell you.
They're gonna think like I'm giggling at them, but that's
I wasn't sure if he was like having a funny thought about what Glenn was saying.
No, it wasn't about Glenn.
It's difficult to tell sometimes because we don't really give any real indication. Like, we could be laughing about like about something very related, could be something unrelated. It's just like
Sure.
It's related.
unless we say say whether it's related or not, you can't really know.
Cool.
Yeah, sometimes I just laugh and I don't even know why I'm laughing. It just something comes to me, like it just makes me smile, and I'm like, I don't know. It just like even right now, like why am I laughing? I don't even know. But it just is what it is.
Yeah, like your simulator is always running, just gives you something funny sometimes.
For sure. Alrighty. Well, it's 7:30. Good time to call it. I think actually that was a pretty fun session. Sometimes our freestyle ones we get in really interesting places.
Yeah,
That's
cool.
Alrighty. So then the plan is Sunday. Dun dun dun. This week, Mitchell. Look
Right.
forward to it.
Quiz.
All right, everyone. Have a good night.
All right.
Good night, everyone.
See you.
Good night, guys.